Hello and welcome back to the Banjo-Kazooie Retrospective, a bi-video series where I'm going over my history with the beloved bear and bird. Now this might be obvious from the title, but this is part 2 of the retrospective. I know, strange given that part 2 is the game that kick-started everything, but I guess that's what happens when your first role in a game is to be a support character to race a space pig. Regardless, if you missed part 1, bam, card is there, and there will be a spot at the end too. So with that out of the way, let's get started. I bet a lot of people in my generation say this nowadays, but the 90s and early 2000s were a magical time, especially for video games. It was an era, the start of something huge, games that would be considered masterpieces, collaborations that would become something massive, a revolution in 3D game design, and what do they all have in common? Sheer unpredictability. Back in my day, sonny, the internet wasn't this all-consuming force. I didn't see a top story or horrific fact about humanity every hour back then. Instead, I would be surprised by what came my way or what I would suddenly find on a shelf at GameStop. For instance, when I first saw Smash Bros, I was shocked that Mario was fighting Pikachu and oh, look, there's Fox McCloud! I just played Star Fox 64 and he's in this game. My kid brain was like, what? And then there was a Mario game where everything was paper and what? What is this and why is it so good? The age of surprise, that's what I'll call my N64 days. You might realize by now that I'm of course building up to Banjo-Kazooie. See, after Diddy Kong Racing, a certain game came out and it was the talk of the town. Gamers at my school were like, Banjo-Kazooie is so good. That's my best kid impression. Sue me. Meanwhile, I was like, okay. I didn't really get into the Banjo-Kazooie craze, and it's not like I ever raced as the bear that much as a kid in Diddy Kong Racing. I had Tip-Top with his masterful acceleration, turn-in, and facial structure. In fact, I never owned Banjo-Kazooie as a kid. The only way I saw the game was through my childhood best friend Matt. That being said, seeing the gameplay back then felt special. I'll go over why later, but the Banjo game I owned as a kid was Banjo-Tooie, so in a way, Banjo-Tooie was my Banjo-Kazooie. It wouldn't be until several years later that I finally got a copy of this game from a retro game store, and it was easily worth every penny. Now comes the hardest part of this retrospective, talking about and or reviewing Banjo-Kazooie. How does one go about it? Do you go level by level, only talk about the gameplay, give it a 10 out of 10 out of nostalgia alone? It seems like every so-called review of the game isn't even a review. It's just saying it's good. The end. Now that's obviously not such a bad thing, but you can't really review a game like Banjo-Kazooie, not normally I mean. I can review a game and icon like Undertale, but that game has a structure that can be reviewed and understood by anyone. Trying to review Banjo-Kazooie in any traditional sense is like trying to explain rocket science to a squirrel. It just can't be done and it's confusing for everyone. Banjo-Kazooie is a game that has to be experienced. It's a game that is simple in nature, but the progression of the game is entirely up to you, the player. There may be a set objective for the whole game, but each level on their own can be tackled how you want to tackle it. There's no get from point A to point B. It's more like, how do I get from point A to point Z? For this retrospective, I think the only thing I can do is cover these main components on their own merit. They each deserve their own time slot for praise, discussion, whatever. It's like cutting a slice of pizza instead of trying to eat the whole pie. Easier and cleaner. Speaking of easier, for this video, the footage you're looking at is not my own. After emulating Diddy Kong Racing only for it to crash before the final boss naturally carries over my worry that trying to emulate Banjo-Kazooie for captured footage will naturally yield the same result, but it could happen at any time. This game is a bit larger than a racing game, so I hope you understand my concern. I was able to play the game itself on my N64 during my off time, but considering my 2-week upload schedule, I did not have enough time to 100% the game. As of this script I started writing on July 23rd, I just reached Rusty Bucket Bay. I'm close to the end of the game, but I'm not sure if I can find all the nodes and jiggies to fight the final battle with Grunty, so I may need to work off of memory at that point. Alright, let's stop the video right here. Hi, Trevor Tiger. We'll be right back to Trevor Tiger in just a moment, but just want to give out a quick editor's note. I managed to beat the whole game again on August 4th, 2 days before this video was supposed to be released, so which means I had to re-record my bits on Rusty Bucket Bay onward with less than a day to finish everything up. And have you faced a deadline crisis before? Because I think I aged 20 years trying to get this all done in time.
And now, our feature presentation.
Enough with the stalling. Let's talk about the easiest thing to go over. Once upon a time, in a faraway land, a fat witch looked into her boiling cauldron pot, saw a female cub in bunches, and was like, I'm a taker, so I can be cute. The end. What were you expecting? A detailed lore full of Easter eggs, cameos, and countless theories trying to figure out what Banjo's necklace is all about? Get that unnecessary complex storytelling out of here! In Banjo-Kazooie, you're given the simplest story other than Mario saving Princess Peach. Your sister was taken by a witch. Go save her. And even though that's the plot, how it's handled, it's so ingenious and over the top, it oozes with cartoonish whimsy. One day, Gruntilda the witch got into an argument with her Disney pot because she's not the prettiest girl around. That title has now been given to Banjo's sister, Tootie. Okay, so Grunty decides to kidnap her. Okay, how will she do that? Flying over the kingdom? No. Teleportation spell? No. Send a minion? No. As it turns out, this witch's home, her magical fortress, shaped in her image, is right next door to Banjo and Kazooie's house, which raises so many questions. 1. How did Grunty not know about Tootie all this time? Because it's obvious she's been alive for a few years. Did she just not ask her pot at all since Tootie's conception? You could argue that, but Grunty's an egotistical narcissist. He wants all the praise he can muster. The intro cutscene paints this as a daily routine for her. How did she not know about Tootie since she lives in Grunty's domain? 2. Going off on that, how did the pot miss Tootie at all? It's not scared of telling Grunty how it is in the beauty department. And I guess most importantly, 3. Why is Banjo's house next to the lair of an evil witch? Did she not notice the construction? Was she a bad neighbor and ignored Banjo? Was he a bad neighbor? Was this the only spot on the entire Isle o' Hags, which is the island that the Banjo-Kazooie cast live on, that Banjo could find? Shame there wasn't a diverse paradise he just raced through on his own that he could call home. Was the real estate or home value that easy to obtain? Well, judging from a certain game in the future, that wasn't the case! And 4, when Grunty is on her broom, how is that thing not broken into or in immense pain from pressure? It's sentient! What, does it have Vegeta levels of durability? This doesn't make sense! But maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe I shouldn't question the logic when a bird lives in the backpack of a freaking bear. This intro cutscene is again so bizarre in its execution, but it doesn't get in the way of the message. Your family's been taken. Do something about it. And that's it. There's no side quest, no surprise twist of a villain.
If only there was someone out there who loved you.
Just a nice, simple rescue. And the writing only makes this intro cutscene all the more fun. The only thing that possibly adds to the story is that you can hear little pieces about Grunty from her fairy sister Gruntilda, who appears in certain spots inside Grunty's tower, and is happy to share gross gossip about her evil sister oh. So I'm not quite done yet. 5! How in the molehill did the pot not know about Gruntilda? Almost every single level in this game is a unique work of platforming art. The simplest way to describe them is to call these levels a perfected version of Super Mario 64. When you first start the game, you get to roam around Spyro Mountain. Around it are different molehills that you can learn basic moves from bottles. It's a tutorial, but the main gimmick is that there's a sense of freedom to it. You don't get a menu popping out of nowhere telling you to press a button or do something. There's no loading screen going over your controller. The tutorial is woven into the world itself. Now, one would think that this is your hub area to explore the different levels. I mean, the giant witch stone head of death seems to be an obvious indicator of final level, but in a nice twist, That's the hub world. And not just any hub world, it's like its own little labyrinth full of turns and stairs that lead up multiple floors. I remember when I first played this game on my own years ago, I got lost in this tower, but even though I was lost, I wasn't annoyed. The game and I had this symbiotic relationship that was like, oh, you don't know where you're at? Shame if you explored this unknown section and found anything interesting. It's up to you. The tower itself only gets larger in scope as each world you conquer opens more rooms for exploration. What I find awesome is that the hub world changes its design the closer you get to a level. Mumbo's mountain is self-explanatory with a giant hill and a nice looking meadow. Gobi's Valley has a quicksand moat, and Mad Monster Mansion has a full-on graveyard aesthetic. These little areas immediately tell players, this is what you're in for, get ready. Out of the 9 individual levels, I love all but one of them. Would you like to guess which one I don't like? If you thought it was Clanker's Cavern, then you are incorrect. It's actually Treasure Trove Cove. I'm lying again. I can't even say that with a serious face. I mean, look at my face. This is the face of a very serious man. Seriously though, I hate Rusty Bucket Bay.
With a vengeance.
We'll get to that level, but let's briefly go over how the overall design of the levels is amazing, at least to a nerd like me. I say this is Mario 64 perfected because each level can be done however you see fit. All these levels are your own adventure that's yours for the taking. In Mario 64, once you collect one of the stars, you're taken outside of the level. It's up to you if you want to jump back in the world and start all over again, or go to a different world. The only exception is if you get the 100 coin star, but that is a nightmare and I'm not ready to talk about that yet. In Banjo-Kazooie, all the collectibles are there in the level for you to grab at your own pace. Each world is big, but it's never too big. Not once did I encounter an empty area. There's always something to do, something to go towards. Like I said at the beginning, every world is giving you the opportunity to go from point A to point Z. Will you go after the Jiggies first, or find all the music notes scattered around the level? Maybe you like to be unorthodox and go after the Gingers first. Or maybe you want to go after all of them at the same time, but there's no specific order, so it feels like you're Lord of the Ring in each world. I may not have that much nostalgia for this game, that's where Banjo-Tooie comes in. But the worlds have this charm that even though they're vast and open, they don't feel as barren as some open world games. It's just right, said Goldilocks before getting murdered by sentient bears. Now, do you really think I'm going to briefly talk about each level on their own because I want to gush over a fair amount of them? If so, then you got yourself a honey-soaked yes. Mumbo's Mountain. I love this level. Where Spyro Mountain teaches you how to play the game, Mumbo's Mountain teaches you the gameplay itself. As in what you're looking for, how many collectibles there are, how transformations work in the game to get you extra collectibles, and giving you a scope of the level designs that are to come. What I find awesome about Mumbo's Mountain is that it isn't difficult in the slightest, but it also doesn't spell anything out for you. It's like playing Zelda on the NES and Breath of the Wild for the first time. You have your world and you just jump right in. And while that does sound daunting, the game isn't complicated, so it's easy to figure out what you have to do to progress. There really isn't much to say about Mumbo's Mountain, but that's the point. It's a great introduction level like Green Hill Zone or World 1-1. It's just a really good starting level. On to Treasure Trove Cove, and yes, I am one of those people that will proudly say that this is my favorite level in the whole game. The level design is so simple. Probably because it's just one big circle, but there's so much to do and see. I didn't go 10 seconds without seeing something to do or trying something new. This feeling only explodes when you learn a new move in this world, the ability to fly. Even though Banjo-Tooie blew my kid mind when I learned to fly in the first half hour, it was cool to finally get the chance to fly in the original game. Getting used to flying itself rewards you with more collectibles at the top of the cove, and I love how the higher up you go, the music fades away until you only hear the ambient sounds of the ocean. And then you get immediately tempted to jump off the cove to hear the awesome music again. Speaking of awesome, Captain Blubber is the best side character for simply going, "Way!" And most importantly, Snacker the Shark can die for all the fear he caused, even as an adult. Clanker's Cavern. A lot of people don't like this level, but I actually do. A lot of water levels I play don't have that much to offer aside from their music, but at least with this level, I can tell an attempt has been made on all fronts. The pace is slower, don't get me wrong, but I didn't feel bored or annoyed at all. The slower movement in the water along with the air pockets are a necessary evil, but to be honest, I played much worse water levels and I still had some sense of fun. I guess it was kind of needed too. After Mumbo's Mountain and Treasure Trove Cove, I didn't mind the slightly slower pace. Not too easy, but not too hard either, just a tad slower. Bubblegloop Swamp. Can we just take a moment to realize that as kids, we never questioned the name of this world? Bubblegloop Swamp. The first part of the name sounds like we aren't in the right section of the ESRB system. So anyway, Bubblegloop Swamp is an alright level. What holds it back for me is that it's honestly the easiest level in the game for me. All but one of the jiggies were found by wandering around and doing the slightest of jobs. Is that him? Is that my Tip-Top? My Tippy, what a big body you have there. I guess turtles in the Rare universe grow up quite a bit. Going off topic here, but if I asked you, how hard could a crocodile eating competition be, would you think it'd be that hard? If you did, then you're wrong. Because it's pure evil! Welcome back to a new episode of Rant Time with Ticked Trevor. The minigame with Mr. Vile the Crocodile was a nightmare for me. It's a simple challenge. Eat more of these things called Grumblies than Mr. Vile 3 times to earn a Jiggy. The first 2 rounds are simple enough since you have a fair chance to win, but the 3rd round is where the frustration mounts the curb and drives through a building. You practically need a turbo boost unlock from Gobi's Valley, a future level, to beat Mr. Vile in round 3. But since you move faster, you run the risk of touching the wrong kind of Grumblies, making you lose time and effectively the minigame. Round 3 required perfection to not lose, and the fact that you have to beat Mr. Vile makes it worse. What do I mean by that? Well, if you tie with him in his perfect AI brain, meaning that he can make a comeback of 50 points in the last 10 seconds, you lose. That makes no sense, and I tied with him twice on my playthrough, which only made me angrier than the Hulk stabbing his toe on an adamantium stove, and I really hate this minigame. So anyway, moving on to a better world. Freeze Easy Peak. Man, I must have been hit with the Mandela effect because I always swore it was called Freezy Peak. Quick, what universe am I in? Is it the one where Dr. Eggman becomes the president? Actually, that doesn't sound too bad, so long as he got past his little repetition phase in 2005.
You know what they say, 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 the more the merrier.
Mother? Treasure Trove Cove may be my favorite level, but this level just makes me really happy. Like sitting down in front of a fireplace after a day of winter sledding. All is right with the world. Except, of course, the racism against bears. The jiggies this time are harder to find, but it's probably because I just got through the swamp level. Freeze Easy Peak isn't too hard though. It just requires a little more exploration in your surroundings since your tasks or the jiggies themselves aren't in plain sight. Also, this level is where you learn the Beak Bomb move, which is the best move in the game. Just listen to Kazooie. Now, a lot of people did not care for the Twinklies minigame since one mistake protecting these literally dim-witted bulbs cost the game, but I was able to do fine on my own. Same with the Boggy the Polar Bear races. I just found Boggy annoying and evil since you need that turbo power-up from a future world to beat him, so every time I passed Boggy, it was like he was taunting me with his Santa belly. Acts just like him too. Doesn't visit children at all until it's time for presents. Hooray materialism, you selfish dick! That aside though, I thought these 2 games would be torture, but I guess after Mr. Vile, I'm immune to horrendous minigames. The honeybee was that. Gobi's Valley, finally get to talk about this world. I don't know if this world was the largest level in the game, but it certainly felt like it. It's so open for exploration, but it's not like Treasure Trove Cove where there's always something to do with every few steps. That's what holds this level back for me. The jiggies in this level took a long amount of time to find, but part of the reason was that open area to explore, and the tasks themselves to get the jiggies had more steps or obstacles to overcome. Gobi's Valley is not my favorite level, but I wouldn't call it bad, just lengthy and harmless at best. At least Clanker's Cavern had the excuse of being a water level, with Gobi's Valley, beating this level felt like crossing the desert and dying of exhaustion. Speaking of dying, Mad Monster Mansion. This is definitely in my top 3 levels of the game. Just like TTC, there's a lot to do through the level, but I never felt overwhelmed. The world honestly felt like Disney's Haunted Mansion. Both can be creepy in their own right, but they have a lighthearted approach. Now, I haven't talked about the transformations you can do in this game a lot, but I should mention at least this level's pumpkin transformation for now. I never thought I'd say this in a video game, but I'd rather be an ant than a bouncing pumpkin. Actually, A Bug's Life might make me think on the same wavelength. Anyway, I didn't like the pumpkin sections of this level. At least the other transformations had a unique visual look or extra gameplay section, but you can't really do that for a pumpkin, regardless of how amazingly cartoonish it is. Though then again, finding a Jiggy by flushing down a giant haunted toilet is... well, I don't need to say anything after that, do I? I also love the tiny aesthetic you have in the mansion. It adds a bizarre factor, but only helps immerse the player in the level. By the way, anyone else notice that the spelling minigame in this world looks like a Smash Ultimate custom stage? Mad Monster Mansion is again a personal favorite of mine. Do you know what isn't though? Rusty Bucket Bay! Easily my least favorite level in the game. In fact, all of the industrial themed levels in this franchise are personal dislikes for me. Anyway, Rusty Bucket Bay feels like it's the sequel to Clanker's Cavern, but like most sequels, it doesn't need to exist. I wish we had a new unique level instead of another industrial one. It worked fine with the water level, but in this open space, it didn't do it for me. The collectibles to find aren't even that bad, but they were boring to get. It's the first time I ever felt bored in this game, and that's a shame because it makes that feeling stand out even more against everything else I talked about. I hope I don't rustle too many feathers, but I don't have much else to say. This level felt boring and unneeded. At least the final level did something new. Click Clock Wood. This is a pretty cool level, sometimes literally. The main gimmick is that this world can switch between the 4 seasons. The seasons themselves were really fun to explore through, and I loved the bee transformation just for the flight alone. How come you couldn't fly, pumpkin? You had short bursts of gravity defiance, and that's it. That is all you will ever have. I like how the seasons come into play by switches instead of waiting for a time period or going into the level at a specific time. It made the level that much better in comparison to others. To be honest though, the Jiggies in this level felt as uneventful as Rusty Bucket Bay, but at least they were found in a fresh environment. This level is simple but with a nice twist. Not as memorable as the other worlds, but I don't mind it that much. Now I will go into the ending of the game, but I'll save that for the gameplay section. Let's instead gush over something that deserves nothing but positivity. I'm willing to bet that if you visited a site called YouTube, specifically focused on the gaming or review territory, you probably heard background music or remixes from the Banjo-Kazooie soundtrack. And honestly, I can't really blame anyone for doing that. This soundtrack is fantastic, and the legend behind it is the gracious, godly, gallant Grant Kirkhope. You all have heard the main level themes when I talked about the levels themselves, but what makes the soundtrack stand out for me is the level of detail. The main level songs actually have variations from certain fights, to anytime you go underwater, to interior parts of the level, and even an underwater variation of the interior part. Every other song is just as bouncy and lively. Even the short fanfares have just as much energy, if not more. There is no dull music in this soundtrack. For years, I haven't found a way to describe the overall soundtrack, and to be honest, I still haven't. However, I can let this fact stand because the soundtrack is iconic and there is a reason you hear these songs a lot across a wide variety of content creators. The lighthearted and mesmerizing feel of a cartoon or unique world is in full force, and what else needs to be said? It's like trying to explain who Jesus was. You all know what they're about and why they're iconic and praised across the board. And while we're on the subject of praise, I think it's high time we finally talked about ah yes, the finishing piece of resistance. At its core, Banjo-Kazooie is a collectathon. In every level, you have to find 9 Jiggies, 100 music notes, and 5 creatures called Jinjos to 100% them. The nice thing about these collectibles is that even though the Jiggies are the crutch of the whole collecting scene, they share equal importance to the music notes and Jinjos. Probably because finding the 5 Jinjos unlocks a Jiggy for your efforts, and finding music notes is how you progress through Grunty's tower. Mentioned before, to help make some levels more unique, there's a transformation you can use to earn yourself a Jiggy or two. They're not game changers, but they're a nice little addition. Now, if you gave this game to a kid and said that you needed to find all these collectibles, and they're scattered across vast worlds and that can take a lot of precious time, how would you get them to enjoy the game? Well, I would make a stupid Fortnite joke to stay hip in the modern times, yo, but upon looking up on YouTube, Banjo-Kazooie Fortnite, I found a certain video, and yes, I am going to share it with you, because life is cruel and I want you all to suffer with me.
No, let's play Fortnite. Got you scrubs? Yeah. Yeah, these scrubs are getting awful.
Does it feel like a trial? Does it trouble your mind the way you trouble mine?
The real answer is that even though finding everything seems challenging, the controls and your moveset are fantastic, and that control never feels out of your reach. You may have your basic moves like flight, ground pound, and running attacks, but they can get expanded upon, as well as finding new power-ups entirely to make exploration that much more interesting and engaging. The moves you learn never stack up to be too much to handle. This game wasn't built by mashing good controls and level design together. Instead, the game is modeled around the 3D platforming and never asks too much of you. The game may have its hard moments, but it's nothing that you can't handle on your own. If you mess up 95% of the time, it's on you. It's very easy to be immersed in this game, most likely due to the incomprehensible amounts of charm. Characters are witty, the humor was on point and still holds up today. These were new for this age of gaming. Going back to the characters, Banjo is simple with a heart of gold and Kazooie has more sass than ice freaking tea.
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
Surrounding them are characters that offer their own wit or humor, kind of like a cartoon cast of Monty Python. The writing in this game, especially with Grunty's taunts that rhyme as you approach the top of her tower, are a true delight. The worlds, characters, controls, music, everything that you've seen and heard so far blend together into a unique, creative experience that can't ever be replicated. And even though this game had a sequel and a spiritual successor, neither one has been able to match the masterful execution of game design of Banjo-Kazooie. I may have more love for Banjo-Tooie since that game was a huge factor in my childhood, but I will not argue the fact that the original Banjo-Kazooie game is fantastic. There's a reason it's called a masterpiece, a true gaming icon, and why it's remembered fondly even though it wasn't in the gaming spotlight for over a goddamn decade after a horrific train wreck. The only possible complaints I can think of is that I didn't like how if you re-enter a world, all of the music notes respawn. It was a bit confusing coming back to levels for any possible jiggies, but most of the time, all the notes can be found without the most crucial of power-ups. I just made music notes my top priority in levels the first time I entered them so that I didn't have to be confused later on, and that's my professional tip when tackling this game. The only other complaint I have is that some of the voices or sound effects for characters' dialogue are
A bit wonky.
But honestly, aside from those two complaints along with everything else I talked about so far, I got nothing else negative to say. I do have one more surprise though, and it's one the game throws at you. At the end of the game, you're greeted with not a final battle or a celebration, instead it's Grunty's Furnace Fun. Think of it as Mario Party, except almost every space you land on has a trivia question or challenge that you need to get correctly to move on. I'm sure that this threw everyone into a loop the first time they saw this. You conquered several worlds only to get a pop quiz at the end. If that's not the definition of evil, I don't know what is. Is that what I'm going to get when I ascend to the great beyond? A pop quiz on my life, and if I don't get a 70%, I drop straight to hell? If that's the case, don't even bother, God. Just give me the express elevator down. Now, Grunty's Furnace Fun is not bad, but I do think that Banjo-Tooie had a much easier, shorter, and more engaging trivia game. So after everything, you get to take on Grunty on the top of her tower, and it is brilliant. This is easily my favorite part of the game, and it's one of my favorite boss battles in gaming, period. Grunty is a gauntlet of a boss, testing practically every move you learned in the game. What's awesome is that I usually find bosses that require every move learned in order to beat it boring, because with some moves you can easily exploit the match to your favor, or the move itself is just bad so the boss becomes frustrating. With Grunty, like the game itself, is built around your skill set. She's just fast and tough enough to present a real challenge without getting annoying or excessive. Also, the freaking music! After wailing on the old witch enough times, the Jinjos finally get their justice as the Great Jinjonator, yes, it's the actual name for this thing and I'm so happy, is summoned and finally knocks Grunty off her high tower once and for all. She crashes into the ground and is done in by a lone boulder. You know, I just realized something. Donkey Kong 64, another rare classic, had an end boss that took an unbelievable amount of damage, but didn't stay down until a support character out of nowhere finishes the fight and gives you the sweet W. So what you're telling me, Rare, is that if I become a green supervillain, I'll be borderline invincible except to boot cannons and rocks. Well then, so long as I get to move to the countryside, world domination will be mine! And with that, we finally get our ending. A nice, relaxing island party that feels earned after a long-had adventure. And there's melons! This game did not hold back, did it? Makes me wonder though, how did Banjo-Kazooie accomplish this? A game of this caliber that came out of nowhere and is yet something of unparalleled value? Well, I do have one idea, and it brings us to the last topic. What does Mario, Sonic, Crash Bandicoot, Doom Guy, and Mega Man have in common? They're simple, easy to understand, easy to follow. Mario saves the princess, Sonic, Crash, and Mega Man fight evil doctors, and Doom Guy takes down demons. What's helped them stay relevant is that their games all stem from simplicity. Their controls, plot, level design, and even personalities are easy to follow. That way, they can appeal to practically anyone. Mario didn't become the king of video games by being as complex as Metal Gear Solid, though I would pay money to see that. He got there by having games focused on the simplest level of fun, but making sure that stride was handled in great execution. Long story short, make a good game by not stretching things out or taking itself too seriously. Banjo-Kazooie is the perfect example, and to me, is the mascot of a great game. The controls, simple. Levels, simple. Music, simple as well, but only in the sense that anyone can understand and enjoy it. The gameplay, simple. It doesn't try to be anything more than a fun 3D platformer, but it was done so well that Banjo and Kazooie became gaming icons, practically the mascot for legendary characters. Is there anything else that can be said? Honestly, not so much. My only regret is that I didn't hop on the love train when this game first came out, but if you haven't gotten the hint already, play this game, I think it's that good. And that wraps up this part of the Banjo-Kazooie retrospective. Next time we tackle the sequel Banjo-Tooie. And can I review something without being too nostalgic? Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you legends next time. Take care.